A single dad helped a shivering paralyzed CEO. The secret she hid changed his life forever. The wind off Route 9 cut through everything that December evening, sharp and unforgiving, the kind of cold that made people move fast between their cars, and whatever warmth waited indoors. Marcus Webb didn't have the luxury of moving fast. His old pickup truck needed gas, and gas needed paying for, and paying for things needed careful counting these days. He pulled into the station just past 6, the sky already dark, his breath clouding in front of him as he stepped out into the wind. He was 34 years old, though the past 2 years had aged him in ways that didn't show on a calendar. His wife, Sarah, had died from a sudden illness, leaving him alone with their daughter Lily, who was 8 now, and growing up faster than he wanted her to. He worked at Reyes Auto Repair downtown, pulling double shifts whenever he could get them, because diapers turned into school shoes turned into class trips, and the bills never seemed to slow down to match his paycheck. He swiped his card at the pump, watched the numbers climb slower than he liked, and rubbed his hands together against the cold. That was when he heard it, a small, sharp sound, almost like a gasp, coming from a few pumps down. A black sedan sat there, expensive-looking, the kind of car that didn't usually stop at a station like this one. Its driver's door was open, and a woman was halfway out of her seat, one hand gripping the doorframe, her whole body trembling. Marcus didn't think, he just moved. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Up close, he could see she wasn't just cold. Her hands shook in a way that seemed disconnected from the temperature, like her body wasn't fully listening to her. She wore a long wool coat that looked like it cost more than his truck, and underneath the fear in her eyes, there was something else. Embarrassment, maybe, or the particular kind of frustration that comes from needing help and hating it. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice wavered. "I just need to get my chair from the back seat. My hands aren't cooperating tonight." Marcus glanced past her and saw a folded wheelchair in the back of the sedan. He didn't ask questions. He simply walked around, opened the back door, and lifted the chair out, unfolding it with the kind of practical efficiency that came from years of fixing things with his hands. "I've got it," he said gently. "Just tell me how you like to be moved, and we'll take it slow." She studied him for a moment, as if surprised that he wasn't asking why a woman in a coat like that was struggling at a gas station, or why her body trembled with more than cold. He just waited, patient, the wheelchair locked and ready. With his help, she settled into it, and he noticed she was still shaking, her teeth nearly chattering. Without a second thought, he shrugged off his own jacket, thin as it was, and draped it over her shoulders. "You'll catch a cold out here," he said. "Come sit in my truck a minute. Heater works, even if nothing else on that thing does." She hesitated, but only for a second. There was nothing threatening about him, nothing that made her cautious the way she usually was around strangers. She let him wheel her over and help her into the passenger seat of his truck, and he climbed in after her, turning the heat up high. "I'm Marcus," he said, rubbing his hands together in front of the vents. "Elaine," she replied, not offering a last name, and he didn't ask for one. They sat there for nearly 10 minutes while the truck warmed and her shivering slowly eased. She explained, somewhat reluctantly, that her usual caregiver had called in sick that morning, and she'd convinced herself she could manage driving to an important meeting on her own. The cold and the stress of the drive had been too much, and her hands, which sometimes struggled with fine movements since an accident years earlier, simply gave out on her at the worst possible moment. "That sounds like a rough night," Marcus said simply, no pity in his voice, just understanding. "You want me to follow you to wherever you're headed? Just in case the car gives you any more trouble." Elaine blinked at him, caught off guard by the offer. People rarely offered her anything without wanting something back, or without that careful, pitying tone she'd grown to dread. But Marcus said it the same way he might offer to help a friend move a couch. Plain, easy, expecting nothing. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know I don't have to," he answered, smiling slightly. "I'm offering." In the end, she accepted, and he followed her sedan the rest of the way to a downtown office building, watching until she made it safely inside. He never asked her name beyond what she'd already given, never asked what she did for work, and drove home to relieve the babysitter and tuck Lily into bed, already forgetting, in the rush of his ordinary life, that anything unusual had happened that evening. But Elaine did not forget. What Marcus didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that Elaine Voss ran one of the largest logistics companies in the state. She was known in business circles as sharp, occasionally intimidating, and almost impossible to get close to on a personal level. She kept her private life sealed away, hidden behind assistants, lawyers, and a carefully built public image, as someone who didn't need anyone. The wheelchair, and the trembling hands, were the result of a car accident 11 years earlier, one that had changed everything about how she moved through the world. She rarely spoke about it. Even her closest employees only knew the basic outline, not the details, and certainly not the guilt she carried that had nothing to do with her own injuries. That night, after the meeting Marcus had escorted her to, Elaine sat in her quiet apartment and found herself thinking about him more than she expected to. Not in a romantic way, not yet. Just a persistent thought, returning again and again, about how strange it had felt to be helped by someone who asked for nothing and treated her like a person having a hard night, rather than a fragile thing to be managed. A week later, she drove past that same gas station, slower than necessary, telling herself it meant nothing. She didn't see him. The week after that she went again, this time at the same hour she remembered from before, and there he was, filling up his old truck, looking tired in the particular way that single parents look tired, worn down but still upright, still moving. She rolled her window down and called out a thank you, mentioning the coat she still needed to return. It became, without either of them quite deciding it, a habit. She would find reasons to be near that station around that time, and he, simple and unsuspecting, would chat with her for a few minutes while his tank filled, telling her small stories about his day, about Lily's latest school project, about the particular stubbornness of a customer's old engine. Elaine learned, slowly, that he had lost his wife, that he worked himself thin to keep his daughter in a good school district, that he hadn't taken a single day off in longer than he could remember, not because he didn't want rest, but because rest cost money he didn't have to spare. He never once mentioned struggling, never asked her for anything, not even when his old jacket, the one he'd given her that first night, eventually came back washed and folded, with a simple thank you note tucked inside. For Elaine, who was surrounded daily by people who wanted things from her, investors, employees, even some friends who seemed to measure their warmth by what she could offer them, Marcus's lack of expectation was almost disorienting. She found herself looking forward to those brief moments at the gas pump, more than she looked forward to most of her scheduled meetings. Then, one evening in late January, Marcus's truck finally gave out for good. The mechanic in him knew the signs long before the engine made its final complaint, but knowing didn't make it easier to face. Without a vehicle, he had no way to get Lily to school, no way to get himself to work on time, and no spare money to fix or replace what had broken. He tried everything he could think of. He asked about borrowing a coworker's old car for a few weeks. He looked into city buses, calculating how much earlier he'd need to wake Lily, how many transfers it would take to get her to school, and himself to the shop on time. He was too proud to ask his sister for a loan again, after the last time, and too stretched already to take on more debt. It was Elaine who noticed something was different before he said a word. He arrived at the bus stop near her usual route one morning, Lily's hand in his, both of them bundled against the cold, looking out of place, waiting in line with people half asleep on their morning commute. When she rolled her window down to greet him, the easy smile he usually wore was harder to find. He explained, briefly, almost embarrassed, what had happened. Elaine said little in the moment, just wished him well, and drove on, but something in her had already decided what she wanted to do. A few days later, she asked him to meet her, not at the gas station this time, but at a small coffee shop near downtown. When he arrived, she was waiting at a corner table, and for the first time, she told him who she really was. Not just her name, but her position, her company, the reason a woman in a wheelchair driving a sedan, worth more than his annual salary, had ended up stranded at a gas station that December night. Marcus listened quietly, processing the information slower than she expected. He wasn't angry, exactly, but there was a wariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "So all this time," he said carefully, "you knew exactly who you were talking to, and I had no idea." "I should have told you sooner," Elaine admitted. "I think part of me liked that you didn't know." It meant you weren't talking to me because of what I could do for you." She slid an envelope across the table. Inside was the title to a reliable used car, registered already in his name, along with a formal offer letter for a position in her company's fleet maintenance division, steady hours, real benefits, and pay that would finally let him breathe a little. Marcus stared at it for a long moment, his jaw tight. "I can't accept this," he said. "It feels like charity, like you're paying me back for one night at a gas station." "It's not charity," Elaine said, her voice steady despite the nervousness underneath it. "It's an opportunity, the same as anyone else might get if they were qualified, which you are. I checked your work record at the shop. Your reviews from customers are excellent. I'm not handing you something you don't deserve, Marcus. I'm just making sure the door is actually open for you to walk through it." He was quiet for a long time, turning the envelope over in his hands, thinking of Lily, of the bus stop, of months of worry that had been pressing down on his shoulders without ever fully lifting. Finally, he looked up at her. "Why does this matter so much to you?" he asked. "You could have just thanked me and moved on with your life." Elaine took a breath, and for the first time, she told him the rest of it, the part she hadn't shared with almost anyone. The accident 11 years earlier hadn't only taken the use of her legs and weakened her hands, it had taken her father's life. He had been driving that night, and she had been arguing with him about something so small she could barely remember it now, distracting him at the exact wrong moment. She had survived, he had not. In the years since, she had built walls around herself, convinced that closeness led to loss, that needing people made her dangerous to them, or them dangerous to her heart. She had thrown herself into work instead, building a company, a reputation, a life that looked successful from the outside, and felt remarkably empty most evenings when she returned to her quiet apartment. Marcus's small, unthinking kindness on that cold December night had cracked something open in her that she hadn't expected and hadn't been ready for. He hadn't seen a CEO or a wealthy stranger. He had simply seen someone who was cold and needed help, and he had given it freely, the way he probably gave most things freely, without calculation. "You reminded me what it felt like to be helped without strings attached," she said quietly. "I wanted to do the same for you, if you'd let me." Marcus sat with that for a long moment, and then, finally, he nodded, sliding the envelope toward himself. "All right," he said, "but I'm not going to be the guy who got handed an easy job and disappeared. I'll work hard for this. I want you to know that." "I already know that," Elaine said, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled without any guarded edge to it at all. Months passed. Marcus settled into his new position, proving himself quickly, with the same steady reliability that had always defined him, earning the respect of his new coworkers without needing to mention how the job had come to him in the first place. Lily, meanwhile, had taken an immediate liking to Miss Elaine, who began stopping by more often, helping with homework, attending a school science fair where Lily proudly explained her volcano project in exhaustive detail, while Elaine listened as though it were the most fascinating presentation she'd ever seen. What started as gratitude slowly grew into something neither of them had planned, but both of them welcomed. Elaine, who had spent over a decade keeping people at arm's length, found herself sitting at Marcus's small kitchen table on a Sunday evening, sharing a simple homemade dinner, Lily chattering happily between them, the kind of ordinary warmth that no amount of success had ever quite given her. For Marcus, life had not become easy overnight, but it had become steadier, lighter, in the places that had felt heaviest for so long. And for Elaine, the woman who had spent years protecting herself from connection, a chance encounter at a gas station had finally taught her that allowing herself to be cared for was not a weakness at all, but simply another form of strength she had forgotten she was allowed to have.